In a small, remote village in the forest, tales of dark magic and witches were whispered in hushed tones. The villagers knew better than to speak too loudly of the coven that resided in the heart of the woods, led by the feared sorceress Alexa. She was said to have the ears of the spirits and the eyes of the owls, casting spells that could curse a generation or bring entire families to ruin. One evening, in the night of the full moon, a time when the veil between the living and the dead was thinnest, the villagers locked themselves indoors, avoiding any glance toward the forest. Jaya, a young and curious hunter, had heard all the stories, but never believed them. Determined to prove that the tales of Alexa and her coven were mere folklore, he armed himself with his bow and ventured into the forest under the moon's light, ignoring the elders' warnings. As he wandered deeper, Jaya felt a chill run down his spine. The trees seemed to whisper his name, and shadows danced around him, defying logic. The path twisted, and soon he found himself lost in a maze of towering trees and gnarled roots. Suddenly, he stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood an ancient crumbling hut covered in vines, surrounded by symbols carved into the ground that pulsed with a faint, ominous glow. The air was thick with the smell of burning herbs and something metallic, like blood. Jaya's heart pounded, but his pride pushed him forward. As he approached the hut, the door creaked open on its own, revealing a dimly lit room filled with strange artifacts, animal bones, jars of murky liquids, and fetishes made from twisted sticks and feathers. In the middle of the room sat Alexa, eyes closed, chanting in a language that sounded like a mix of human and animal voices. Her skin was pale and wrinkled, but she exuded a powerful, malevolent energy. Jaya raised his bow, aiming at her. But before he could release the arrow, Alexa's eyes snapped open, black as the deepest night. She smiled, revealing sharp, stained teeth, and spoke in a voice that echoed from every direction. "You dare enter my domain, mortal. You who doubt the power of the spirits." Jaya tried to reply, but his voice caught in his throat. Alexa stood up, her movements smooth and unnatural, like a serpent gliding across the ground. She raised her hands, and the symbols on the floor flared with blinding light. Jaya's bow flew from his grip, and he was lifted off the ground, suspended by an invisible force. "You will be an offering," Alexa hissed, "to the spirits who hunger for the arrogance of men." As she chanted, shadows materialized around Jaya, taking the shape of twisted, malformed figures. They reached out with long, clawed fingers, pulling at his soul. Jaya struggled, but his body was paralyzed. The last thing he saw was Alexa's eyes, glowing with fiery red light as she completed her incantation. In the village, the fog lifted just as dawn pierced the sky. Jaya was never seen again, but the villagers found a new carving at the forest's edge. A crude, twisted effigy of a man, bound and screaming. They knew then that the stories were true, and the forest was not to be trifled with. From that day forward, no one dared enter the woods during the full moon, for Alexa and her coven were always watching, waiting for the next fool to wander into their domain. And on those nights, when the moon was high and fog rolled in, faint whispers were heard on the wind, warnings of the midnight covenant that bound the living to the will of the spirits and the witches who commanded them.